Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Welcome to Clearer Than Truth. Our guest today is Brad Thor, a New York Times bestselling author of 25 thrillers, best known for his high-stakes Scot Harvath series. He's frequently cited as a master of thrillers for his faction writing style, blending real-world intelligence and geopolitical threats with fast-paced fiction. His newest book, Cold Zero, is out on February 10th. Brad, thanks for joining.
You guys, as I said off camera, I've really been looking forward to this. This is going to be, I don't doubt, the juiciest, meatiest, most intelligent interview / podcast I do on my media tour. You guys are right in my sweet spot. I got to read your bios and everything and watch a little bit of previous stuff, and I'm just super excited. So thanks for having me.
Of course. So tell us about the new book, Cold Zero, with Ward Larsen. I know you're about to go to Savannah today to promote it. I've had a chance to do a deep dive on it. Tell us about it.
Well, so this is my first ever co-authored book, and I had a basket of ideas that I wanted to do books on that wouldn't fit into my current series protagonist universe. And one of them, I'd become interested in how many commercial airline companies were looking at doing polar routes for their aircraft. And I thought, what would happen if we ever had a commercial airliner go down in the Arctic? What kind of a search and rescue would go on for potentially anybody that survived that crash? And then I thought, what if we kicked it up a notch, me being the thriller writer, and there was something on board the aircraft that was a key piece of technology that, in our case, in Cold Zero, there's a Chinese scientist looking to defect. A CIA team helps get him out of China, gets him on the aircraft. And this piece of technology, this prototype, whoever gets their hands on it is going to be the sole superpower. So there is a rush to the North Pole of the Americans, the Chinese, and the Russians. And then, of course, me, like I said, I was so geeked out and excited to come on the podcast. I get to kind of put on my geopolitical hat while entertaining my readers. I get to explain to them, hey, the Chinese have more icebreakers than we do. You know, we've got like 2 barely functioning icebreakers, one of which is committed in real life to resupplying our research stations down in Antarctica. So I get to weave in all this really cool geopolitics stuff into my thrillers, because I say what I do is faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins. So that's kind of a nutshell of Cold Zero, the race to the North Pole. Yes, ostensibly to rescue survivors, but it's really about this piece of tech that goes down in this airplane.
We're certainly fascinated by faction, I think, in part because, we've noticed that in the discussion about international affairs, part of it's politics, but I think part of it is also a kind of lack of imagination that folks are sort of less interested in talking about big themes. I will say that I just saw that at the Council on Foreign Relations, they had the big panel on the icebreaker pact. And, I was just amazed how they didn't want to talk about Greenland. Which kind of struck me as the giant iceberg floating around the room. But I mean, do you think we're kind of stuck here in a moment where folks are just less enthused about geopolitics because we don't tell the story of geopolitics well?
That's actually a very good way to phrase it. I was scrolling through social media the other day, and I saw a clip, like a 30-second clip from Bill Maher, and Van Jones was on. And Van talked about how we are divided. And he said, why we're divided is because we are being divided, right? So the algorithms, the big key for media companies is to make you angry. Because if you're angry, you're going to click, you're going to sit on their sites, you're going to share the content more, you're going to visit more often, all that kind of stuff. So, it's interesting, as a fiction author, I was invited to join something post 9/11 when DHS was stood up called the Analytic Red Cell Program. So they invited a bunch of creative thinkers in from outside the Beltway to help them brainstorm what the next terrorist attack might look like. I thought it was a very aggressive, very forward-thinking government program. I jokingly refer to it as the Las Vegas of government programs because I couldn't put it in my books because what happens in the red cell stays in the red cell, similar to Vegas. But one of the things that's very interesting for me is I get asked a lot in kind of book podcasts, book interviews, well, what do you think is the biggest threat facing the United States? What's one of the biggest national security concerns you have? You talk to all these people, and I say, listen, I think social media is one of the most dangerous things we have in this country because if you have people, and I'll knock my own older family members who are on Facebook groups. No matter what I tell them, they are on these Facebook groups where they are surrounded by like-minded people. They're siloed, right? So they've got all these like-minded people who think exactly like them. And what happens in a situation like that is they let their guard down. They believe that they're safe because they're among like-minded individuals. And those are the places that the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians can push disinformation, because you believe that everything that comes through that Facebook group is legit. So back to your question about Greenland and where we are. Listen, we are living through one of the absolute dumbest times in American history. Populism is just this nasty thing that creeps up, whether it's the farmers and the thing about silver and the know-nothings in the 1800s. You see it with Trump now in just this whole populist nationalist movement. It's hard to think of global affairs. It's hard for most people to look beyond their paycheck, much less across the street. We know this from the founders, that most people operate out of their own self-interest, right? This is why the founders trusted that Congress would zealously protect its own power. But we've seen since Nixon that Congress has ceded more and more power to the executive. So I agree with you 100%. We've got a messaging problem. We have to figure out how do you get the average American interested in what's happening beyond America and how that impacts us. One last thing, and I'll jump off my soapbox. What scares me is I have really successful friends who are super smart that were jumping up and down, so excited about just the cruelty of the deportations, particularly when people were being sent to Scot. And they thought that was so cool and all this kind of stuff. And they wanted all the illegal immigrants out and everything. And I said, guys, listen, I don't disagree with you. I particularly want the criminal illegals out. I said, I could go on for hours about how we're sending the wrong message to even legal immigrants who don't want to come here now. That's a big issue. But what I was trying to explain to these successful, one's a doctor, one's a business owner, I said, do you guys understand that even the Nazis got a review panel before we tossed them or did stuff with them in the 40s in the United States? And we're not affording people proper review. I said, every time we do something like that, where we ignore our own values, when we ignore the rule of law, that actually weakens our standing in the world. And I said, you guys don't even realize what America would be like if we lose our status. The dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency. If we seem shaky and nobody can trust us, and this isn't a safe place to put their money. So, but back to your question, this is all part of how do we educate our fellow Americans? I'm dealing with two highly educated people that this scratches some kind of cruelty, populist itch, just shipping people out in the dark of night and ignoring judges' orders. And they think that's freaking awesome. And they love the stupid ASMR video that those morons at the White House did, where everybody had the chains on and everything. It's really so juvenile and so disgusting. And we're going to pay a huge price as a nation for it, not just during the Trump administration, but for a long time afterwards. It's going to be hard to rebuild.
You should be on CNN, Brad, not writing as many spy thrillers. Or MSN Now, or whatever they call it. Look, I mean, I certainly have a shared worldview, and George does not, and we can dive into both. But I want to just pull it back a little bit to specifically this book, Cold Zero in the Arctic. How much was Greenland on your mind when you were writing about it? We didn't know that we would have such an interest in taking it. I bet when you started thinking about it, because I think I heard you started talking to Ward about the book probably 2 years ago. But how much did Greenland exist in your brain when you were just considering this as a subject?
So the only time Greenland came in as a subject was when we were talking about the C-130s that are on skis that can land on ice. And that is an Air National Guard unit out of New York that often touches down and refuels and does stuff in Greenland. So that was the only thing. Greenland was not hot when we wrote the book. It was only after we had the book put to bed that it really jumped onto the front pages of newspapers. The book was put to bed well before Davos and Trump's pushing on Greenland and all that kind of stuff. I think Yeah, because we did start it a couple years. I mean, I've always looked at Greenland. It's always been interesting as a place. Never in a million years did I think we would get to the point where we were bullying the Danes for Greenland when we've got that treaty from 51 that clearly lets us do basically almost anything we want on that island. It's nonsense that somehow you could just go in there and pull the minerals out. You got to go through a lot of ice. It's very difficult to get the minerals that are on Greenland. But if we wanted to open more bases there, we could. We used to have a lot of bases there. The Danes would be happy to work with us. So the idea that somehow us owning it would make any difference at all, I've yet to hear anyone make an argument how ownership would make a difference in that. But again, it scratches a populist itch. People like that anytime Trump comes up with a crazy idea and it gets pushed back on, these people line up behind him. It's the shooting people on Fifth Avenue. And I hate seeing, shooting our allies on Fifth Avenue or downtown Copenhagen or wherever it might be. NATO's the most successful military alliance in the history of the world. And we pick at it and pull at it at our own peril. But it is back to what George said. It is amazing to me when you ask people what they know about NATO, how little in the United States they know. They don't realize that it was a pledge to meet 2.5% of GDP by each NATO member. They actually think that at the end of the year, these people have got like bills piled up in Paris and in Berlin or wherever it is that they're not meeting their quotas. They're not meeting the commitment of 2.5% of GDP into their own military. People actually think that we stroke checks every year to make up for all the deadbeats in NATO. And somebody somewhere's got a messaging issue. There's that old phrase that politics is downstream of culture, and I'm writing fiction, and I want people to have a good time. My job is not to sway people to my point of view. I don't do that in my books, but I don't think you can do spy thrillers without dealing with government, without dealing with international affairs, global politics, things like that. So I do try to put good information in the books so that number one, my job is to entertain you. I hope you have a great thrill ride. If you close a Brad Thor novel at the end and you know a little bit more about how the world works and you're interested, or you've got some questions you want to go and search up and try to get the answer to, if that happens, that's the icing on the cake for me.
Yeah, I mean, I want to jump in on that point because what I really, admire about your work, and I've read a couple of the novels now. I mean, I'm fascinated by your ability to take this kind of inherently nationalist sort of topic. I think intelligence is, it's about devotion to country in some ways. It's about believing that your state, your government matter, and making it sort of broadly accessible to folks across a political spectrum. But what might, unite many of your readers, that I think unites many of contemporary voters, is this sense that although they aren't wealthy in, a material sense, they have a great deal because they have their country, right? And I ask about this kind of subject because I'm wondering about how, elites in our country got so far away from speaking to those individuals. And I know that a plot line that has action on the first page is one way to do it. But I mean, do you think there are other ways to do it, to, cast something like NATO as a heroic alliance that, the United States is not just, on a security breadline feeding out, people, but instead, kind of upholding some broader, purpose in international affairs? I'm just sort of posing the question more broadly.
No, it's a good question. And I think for me, at least, what I try to do with the books is to show how America's interests are best served. But I am not in the business of making statements. I'm in the business of making entertainment. So I have to entertain my audience. I have to be respectful of the fact. I like to say that you would be an absolute business moron to open a deli and hang a sign on the front door that says, "Open for business, welcome, except blacks, Jews, gays, Hispanic." I mean, if you ran a list on the front of a door and said, I'm open for business except for these people. So I'm trying to write thrillers for all stripes. I don't care how much is in your bank account. I don't care how you vote. I don't care where you grew up. I want everybody to enjoy these books, and I want them to understand how those areas work, whether it's the intelligence community, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's the diplomatic corps, whether it's the relationship. I mean, I have even touched, and I had to be very careful, very fast, like a ninja, in and out, Title 10 and Title $50, and how those could be used and what you could do with the intelligence that was derived from that. I'm not writing textbooks. I'm writing entertainment. So that's really the challenge for me. But listen, I agree with you as far as the elites in communicating. I think I come at it from let me entertain you as the reader. Let me show you some really interesting things that are happening in the world. Let me show you through experiencing some other characters why this matters. This is why reading is so fantastic. As they test reading again and again and again for the benefits that come from actually reading a book, what ends up happening is people who read score much higher on the empathy scale. The ability to see the world through other points of view is massive, and reading contributes to that. So I try to create this experience where you don't bump on any of the characters. I may put a character in front of you with whom you disagree vehemently, but I try to position that. I might disagree with the character vehemently, but I'm trying to show the mental process in that character's minds, or in the character's minds, whether I disagree with them or not. So, would I ever do NATO as the good guys? I've done NATO a couple of times, particularly, again, back to my book that we talked about before, Spy Master from 2018, where the Russians were looking to take the Baltic states. I think I did a really good job of showing why it was important, but particularly why it was important for the United States that not happen. And so I think what I did was I put skin in the game for the reader, if that makes sense. Here's where this would impact you. If this does not go well, this is how it'll reverberate back home and how it'll hurt the United States. And I think that's the way to do it, or at least that's the way I do it.
How much does this spy thriller and your previous spy thrillers draw on real documents and real intelligence from the CIA and FBI and other agencies? And how do you access that? And how much are you allowed to talk about?
No. I'm totally allowed to talk about it. So I don't have a TS clearance, so I don't have to run anything I write through a review board or anything like that. So it's amazing how much open source intelligence is out there. You just have to get good at digging for it. So I've got a big rule. I did a book, and I'm looking off to the side because I can see my credenza with all my books on there, about 5 years ago, that was set in Norway. And it had a lot to do with the Northern Fleet of the Russians and the fact that Norway and Russia border up in the north. And I went to Norway, did a bunch of research for the book in Oslo and around Oslo, and then was scheduled to go up to Svalbard, which is really cool. And then COVID hit, and they shut Svalbard down because you could not, there wasn't enough medical elasticity in their system up there to allowing people to come in, potentially bringing COVID into Svalbard. Very difficult. You'd have to airlift people back who are sick enough to mainland Norway. And
darkest place on Earth, isn't it?
I don't know if it's the darkest place on Earth, but they go through, just like Alaska, they go through that X amount of days of night and everything because they're so north. It is the northernmost consulate in the world. The Russians have a consulate there. So I couldn't go. So to your question, what I did was I reached out. If there's ever a location I can't go to in the books, I want to talk to somebody who operated there, somebody whose job and maybe even their life depended on paying attention to the details. So that may be somebody somewhere in the IC, right? So somebody from DIA or CIA. It could be a tier 1 operator in the military. It could even be somebody in the diplomatic corps. And so a friend of mine introduced me to somebody that he knew that had not only gone to Svalbard, but he'd gone to the Russian part. And had just really clever guy, really, really funny. The Russians will do tours and everything, and they tell you, don't step off the tour, don't step off the tour. He stepped off the tour. And so there's this kind of fun thing in Svalbard because the polar bears are such a threat there. Some towns, you're not allowed to walk out of the town unless you have a long gun or somebody with you that has a rifle. And part of the safety, the agreed to social compact about personal safety is they leave the doors unlocked there. So that, heaven forbid, you're being chased by a polar bear, you can run into any door you see and close the door behind you. So this guy walked off the tour where he had a Russian tour guide and started going into buildings and taking photographs and taking video and all this kind of stuff. And he says, I'll send you a drive with all this stuff on there. I'm like, that's not classified. He's like, no, it's not classified. He goes, and it's several years old. He goes, I already fed it into a reporting stream. And he goes, there's nothing here that's, that you can have it. And so that was extremely helpful for me when I wrote the book. So my stuff is open source. I will tell you that I do have things where I'll work with someone on a book, someone who maybe is active military, active intelligence, or recently retired, and I'll give them the manuscript to read when I'm done. And they'll say, oh boy, we need to talk. Well, what do we need to talk about? Did I get something wrong? No. I'm not saying you got it right. Not saying you got it wrong. But Brad, I told you point A. I told you point C. You need to remove B from the book. And I'm like, we never discussed B. Oh my gosh, I made up B. Did I get it right? Brad, point B has to come out of the book, and I take it out. A, because I'm a good citizen. I would never want to put anything in a book that somebody has asked me not to. And then as a good business person, why would you want to poison the well? If you have somebody willing to share their expertise and the benefit of their wisdom with you, and they say, take that out of the book, you take it out of the book. It doesn't happen that often, but it has happened.
So, Skyfire. What is Skyfire in this book, and what is it drawn from? I immediately went to nuclear weapons, AI technology.
Mm-hmm.
What were you thinking about when you were writing about Skyfire?
It's a
And for
great
our
question.
listeners who haven't listened
Spoiler.
or read the book yet because it's 5 days out, but Skyfire is in a plane, a commercial aircraft that crashes, and then the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans run to get it and recover it. But what is it?
So Skyfire is a man-portable device that my co-author and I talked about and honed down this idea that this would be a man-portable device that could be taken on the battlefield, which essentially, it's to a certain degree, are you familiar with the Stingray that the FBI uses and Homeland Security uses? So Stingray spoof cell towers. So if you take a Stingray to a Black Lives Matter or a Tea Party or the January 6th, whatever, and you set this thing up, people's cell phones think it's a tower, and they will ping against it, and therefore you're able to gather their metadata. So we can go into a whole big, constitutional amendment, the right to be safe in your papers, and is this a warrantless search? What rights do you give up when you turn your cell phone on and it bounces against towers and all that kind of stuff? Totally has nothing to do with my book. But this idea of the Stingray and being able to take this thing into places and spoof other electronics with it, spoof cell phones, not other electronics, just specifically spoof things that work on the cellular network. I'd always been fascinated with that. So I layered in an AI component to it, and Ward and I talked about this, and we said, what about a man-portable box that could come on the battlefield that essentially could function like a little Terminator, where it could take over any of the electronics that the enemy shows up with on the battlefield within a certain distance up into the air, so if they had low-flying aircraft and this kind of a thing. And wouldn't that be a cool thing if suddenly you could either completely halt the enemy's, anything the enemy has that functions with electronics, interrupt their communications, even if they're encrypted, that kind of stuff, halt or reverse and turn against them. So that was the idea of Skyfire. And this is a prototype that the scientist, once he puts it together and realizes, the Chinese scientist, how incredibly powerful this is, and he's lost so much faith in the CCP, he doesn't want China to have it. And so he arranges with the U.S. to defect, and that's where the book begins, of trying to smuggle him out of China, along with the prototype of Skyfire.
It's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm sort of interested, we're entering this moment of kind of a great deal of sort of wrangling over trade policy. And, this is my kind of professional background, and I'm constantly trying to write nonfiction. I've done 3 op-eds in the last 8 months trying to get, narratives out there that show people why this is actually a really exciting area. Do you think there are some areas of technology or policy that are just sort of beyond being made into an exciting thriller arc, or kind of everything with the right touch and the right framing and packaging?
You're talking to the guy who wrote a thriller that was a big bestseller about the Federal Reserve. Anything is possible. Right. Anything is possible. Good.
I want to hear it.
Well, how did you do it? What is your process, right? Like, a lot of people try to write, not many people do it well, but like, what is your actual process to write these books? When do you start? What's the day by day? I think a lot of people would be interested to hear that. I certainly would be.
It's interesting. So, like the Fed, for example, I love American history, and so I had this idea: what if the Fed Reserve Chairman, the book was called Hidden Order, has a heart attack and dies, and there's a list that the Fed prepares of 5 potential replacements that's going to go to the president, and all 5 of them disappear the same night. Somebody's obviously trying to influence what's going on at the Fed. And what I did is all the people got grabbed the same night, and they all start turning up dead in different places. But the deaths are ritualistic in the sense that they mirror something that the Sons of Liberty did in the run-up to the American Revolution. So each one is a little hallmark death. So there's certain things that happened. There was a whole thing about white pine the Brits reserved certain white pine trees for masts for their ships. So if they were a certain height or a certain width, they got painted with this X, and you weren't allowed to cut them down. And if you ever found to have cut them down, they could. I don't know if it was a capital offense or what, but it was a big deal. And the Brits sent some tax collectors to this guy's place because they heard he had knocked down a bunch of white pines they wasn't supposed to. And that guy was waiting with all his family and all his buddies, and they just absolutely horrifically destroyed the tax collector and the other British representatives that showed up at his property. And so I used that and I said it in Sea Island, Georgia. The first person to die in the book, Nathan, you and I were talking about Georgia. And so her death and the way her body was displayed was and the clues left behind were a hallmark to that event from pre-revolutionary times in the United States. So when I come up with an idea, I'm a voracious consumer of news. I'm a voracious reader of books, and I'm always looking for things that people haven't thought of. So if I see something in the news, I'm always asking, is that really what happened? My third book, State of the Union, the premise is that we did not win the Cold War. We only thought we won it. And in fact, it was a big Russian ploy to roll over and play dead to soak up all this international aid money, which they could funnel into other programs. And they would just step back from the world stage until they were ready to come back even more powerful. So that's the kind of stuff I think about, the hidden order with, 5 potential Fed chair replacements disappearing, State of the Union with the Russians really just let us think the Cold War was over. It wasn't. And then there's 2 types of writers. They say you're either an outliner or a pantser. And I'm a pantser. I'd seat of the pants every day. I don't know what's going to happen next. It's just very short, crisp, cinematic chapters that the books are easy to read. And it's my brain, as I'm writing, I'm seeing it play out like a movie. Every single word I put on the page, how would this scene look like up on the big screen? And that's my creative process. Every book is different. I owe, per contract, I get to write a book a year. I'm trying to work on my positive language. So I get to write a book a year for Simon & Schuster. So each book, sometimes the research takes longer than writing the book. Sometimes it's the opposite. It just depends. But I like to set each book against a big global geopolitical thing. My next Scot Harvath book that comes out in June, called Choke Point, has to do with, we've got all eyes on Taiwan right now, but there was a project that the Chinese really wanted to do as part of their Belt and Road Initiative, that they were never able to convince a particular country to let them do it, and they really need it. And so the new book is about how the Chinese want everybody, they're actually starting to goose things. So people start focusing even more on Taiwan. And it allows them to kind of pull something off in this other country that refused to let them do this particular Belt and Road Initiative project there. And they're going to force that country's hand. But it only works if the rest of the world has their eyes on Taiwan. So they're doing kind of a feint with Taiwan, which also lets them watch how what got me started on this, it allows China to watch how the U.S. responds. And part of what kicked this off is years ago, I read about this project that China wanted to do. And I'm not going to say what it is because I'm keeping it a secret till the book comes out. But I read something about a year towards kind of the early part of 2025, maybe into mid 2025, that I added to the book. I was fascinated that all these Trump people were leaving their homes and moving on to military bases. And I was like, how is this not? Stephen Miller lives on a military base. How is this not getting more attention? Kristi Noem, military base. And I thought, this is really, really interesting from a thriller perspective. Because what if you could weave it into a book that maybe the government is worried that they wouldn't be able to move their people to a secure location, not because of civil unrest, but maybe because of war or something like that, that they were really worried that an enemy was on hair trigger. They didn't want to spook the American public. So they started moving these people, claiming it was for safety, whatever. And that's the facts and the faction. I like to take real world stuff and put it in the books. But that I never heard fully explained more than just it was a security issue. And so many Trump admin people have moved to military bases. And I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm just a fiction guy. And it was interesting to me.
Well, no, I mean, I want to jump in and just say, I think there's a kind of element of body heat in your interaction among the kind of folks who are, involved in the plots and the making policy in your book. in the sense you sort of somehow you intuitively understand, I think, kind of some of the tensions in Washington, in policymaking circles and in kind of some of these, intelligence areas. And I want to ask, how is that? I mean, is that purely an act of imagination, or is it, I've never seen an area of kind of writing that is so obsessed with its own autobiography as intelligence, but I mean, is that how you got a sense for these things? I mean, clearly, to use another metaphor, you sort of felt the heat of the kitchen before.
All right. So it's a 50-50. Okay. So after I came out with my first book, I got two great pieces of fan mail. One was from Burt Lance, the former director of OMB in the Carter administration, who said, Brad Thor captures Washington insider politics better than anybody else. But it was a lovely, lovely piece of fan mail to get from a former cabinet member. So that was Burt. And the other one came from Newt Gingrich, who said that Brad Thor's threats that he comes up with are more more plausible and more terrifying than any Washington-based think tank. So I got both of these lovely from both sides of the aisle. I couldn't have been more thrilled to get something from somebody on the Republican side and somebody on the Democratic side. So that was fun for me. And essentially, what I was doing, particularly in the beginning, was taking what I thought was kind of man's worst nature and dropping it into DC. People protecting turf, people, not willing to work across the aisle, all this kind of stuff. So there was something when I got that praise that that rang a bell with some people. There were things they recognized in my early books. And one of the fun things about, my first book came out a couple months after 9/11. The global war on terror was super hot. We didn't know what was going to happen. Al-Qaeda, we were obviously very afraid of being hit again. Blah, blah, blah. We commit to Afghanistan. We've got Jawbreaker, where the first CIA team goes in and everything. And what ended up happening was it was a great time to be a thriller writer. And so I ended up meeting a lot of people, members of Congress, both houses, got to go to the Bush White House. I've got a wall filled with just lovely notes from people like Colin Powell and stuff like that. It was a really fun time. And the more I got into these relationships and spending time in DC, the more I got to understand the interpersonal dynamics and what's going on and how many people are pressing on decision leaders to make a decision, and where, the kind of information that's flowing to them through staff, and how much stuff makes it to the chief of staff and then dies at that point and doesn't get any further, and blah, 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 blah. So my family jokes that there should be a 12-step program for me. Instead of Al-Anon, it would be called On and On and On, because you ask me a question and I'll go on and on and on for, a half hour. So to get back to your original question, I think it's fiction, it's license. I take artistic license. I look at an issue and I'm not pinging, 20 people about the issue. I dedicated one of my books because it had to do with the hostage rescue czar position. And the hostage rescue czar, at that point, he ended up becoming national security advisor. It was just a dear friend of mine. I've known him since college, Robert O'Brien. And he's always been super helpful with my books. He, in the first Trump administration, back to icebreakers, was pushing for us to lease icebreakers. He's like, we can get some of these. Let's lease them. I think he found one from the Dutch. And he's like, we're going to throw a 50 cal on there, a skiff, and do a big bright orange blaze, Coast Guard paint on the side of it. We need to get these things going. We don't have time to build them. So I've got a few people that I can bounce stuff off of and say, how would you react in this area? But I think the characters as I write dictate to me more of that interpersonal tension than me asking real Washington insiders, like, how would you react in this situation?
Very interesting.
Very good.
And last question. Did I see that that Cold Zero is going to be picked up by Netflix? And when can we expect it on the screen? We all watch too much.
Yeah. Yep. So yes, it has been. It's fantastic because I'm a big Pete Berg fan. He did
Friday Night Lights, right?
He did. He also did Lone Survivor. And
the Friday Night Lights is the best show to ever happen. The others, they're fine, but Friday Night Lights, Tim Ruggins, fullback for the Dillon Panthers, like the best show ever. But when can we expect it?
Well, our writer is Nick Pizzolatto, and Nick did the last screenplay, the adaptation for Magnificent Seven that Chris Pratt was in, and all those other terrific actors. But Nick is probably best known for True Detective on HBO. That Nick created that and wrote that. So we made the deal just before the Christmas holidays. So once Nick's current writing gig at Netflix is wrapped, then he'll start on the screenplay. And then the way Hollywood goes, you know, it may go back and forth a couple times to Netflix. He'll get notes. And then once they sign off on the screenplay, then you start pre-production. They kind of go through with a ruler and try to budget it and say, this is what it's going to cost. But everyone there now, everybody on this team is calling it a bigger, bolder, more badass version of The Hunt for Red October. They want A-plus actors, really smart dialogue. And I don't know if either of you ever saw the movie. I've had this comparison made a couple times and I'm to the book, and it's very flattering. Rock Hudson's a submarine commander. It was in the 60s, and it's called Ice Station Zebra, and it's based off of a book.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a great.
I looked it up this morning, though.
Yeah. Oh, Ice Station Zebra?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an awesome movie about a Russian satellite that crashes in the rush to the kind of the Arctic to get the satellite. And I'd had so many people talk. I had never seen it, and I hadn't read the book either. And I was like, I'm going to wait. I don't want it to influence the writing of this book. And so many people, when they heard about Cold Zero, said, "Oh my gosh, I loved Ice Station Zebra," like my dad's friends and things like that. So I finally watched it. I was like, that's actually a really good movie, and it holds up. I think Ernest Borgnine is in it too, which is wild. Like the last time I saw him was Airwolf, the TV show, like in the 80s. Great character actor. So,
if you need a sometimes funny, handsome 30-year-old nerd in the screenplay, I'm happy to serve that role.
Okay, good.
Happy to do it. But Brad, the book comes out on February 10th. Where can they also follow your work online?
So the best place for everything for me is Brad, B-R-A-D, Thor, Thor.com. Links out to my social media and it has information about all the books, the movies, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, Brad Thor, thanks again for joining Clearer Than Truth.
It's my pleasure. I was looking forward to it. I'm glad I did it.
Thanks again for joining this episode of Clearer Than Truth. Be sure to share with friends and join us next time.